Welcome. I'm Dr. Timothy Neal, and I'm here with Professor Yin Paradies, a race relations expert at the Alfred Deakin Institute for Citizenship and Globalization. With the recent federal election and the return of Pauline Hanson, we thought it was a good time to have a discussion about race relations and racism in Australia. So Yin, is racism gaining traction domestically and internationally?
Yes, it appears to be growing in Australia and overseas. And the reasons for that really have to do with the kind of situations that are emerging in the world. So large-scale political, social events like global financial crises, political events like Brexit in the UK, and even things like climate change. All these things impact on people's lives, and they react to them with concerns and fears and worries about the future that often end up translating into anger and hate against certain groups in society who form a kind of scapegoats for these emotions.
Because is racism, as some say, a matter of free speech?
Well, certainly there is a lot of talk of that, but really for me free speech is something quite different from racism. So free speech is about being able to express your own views, being able to critique others' views, and just engaging in debate about different ideas, which makes for a kind of healthy democracy, really, in the end. Whereas racism, as opposed to that kind of inclusionary approach, is really all about exclusion. It's about creating fear and hatred of certain groups. It's about instilling sort of views of violence even, or at least conflict and disorder between different groups in a society, and that creates something very different to the inclusiveness of free speech.
And why discussions about racism so distinctively emotional more than they are rational?
Yeah, I guess that comes really from the basis of racism, which is all about emotions. The evidence that we have, and broadly in the literature, shows that racism is driven by emotions, like fear and anxiety and anger and hatred. So those lead on to different stereotypes and particular beliefs, but really those beliefs are not the basis of racism, and so people have very strongly held feelings and views about things, about other groups, about racial difference, and that's why it's difficult to have rational debates about it.
And what are the impacts on an individual of a group or of people targeted for racial discrimination?
Well, initially, of course, there's the ethical wrong against them, so they may be excluded from something, they may be racially abused, whatever that manifestation of racism is. But it goes much further than that to impact on their health. So a lot of research that I've been engaged with has been about the damaging effects of racism on mental and physical health, especially things like depression and anxiety. And other work we've done has looked at the economic impacts of racism. So racism reduces productivity and innovation in a society. And of course, it also creates discord and reduces harmony between groups in society. So really, there's multiple levels that racism asserts its detrimental impacts, and everything from the individual up to society as a whole.
So there aren't just simply ethical reasons for opposing racism, there are all these others.
Yes, well, often ethics are first and foremost, and that's fine, but they're very practical negative outcomes of racism that also occur.
One of the main questions at a time like this is, what can one do, what can I do, what can you do to reduce racism in our society?
Well, really it's about leading by example, so you have to consider your own views, your own feelings, beliefs about other racial groups in society, re-examine those and make sure that you're thinking and behaving in equitable ways towards others. That's very important. And then once you have a kind of awareness from that process, you can look to others in society and look at instances where racism may be happening and try and challenge that whenever it does, whether that's with family or friends or work colleagues or in public places. There's many ways to challenge racism. And of course, if you look beyond individuals themselves, often this isn't done, but societies themselves can be racist. So there's ways that institutions operate that create difficulties for certain people to get work or to benefit from their educational engagement. Things like representation of our nation's cultural diversity in politics. All these things are instances of examples where inclusion in a sort of racial sense can be improved. And so it's often not seen as important, but that institutional side is just as important as the individual angle to racism and addressing it.
So there's been a lot of discussion lately about how to engage with racists. Should we engage with by parodying them? Should we engage by forgiving them and showing compassion? And I was wondering what the research indicates.
Well, there has been research on that, and generally what we find is that this kind of ridicule or I guess disparagement of racism and racists isn't very effective. It polarizes, it entrenches people in their views, it doesn't lead to any sort of change in how people see race in society. So it really is about being respectful in engagement and trying to tap into the underlying reasons why people are being racist. So what are their fears and concerns? What are their beliefs? Perhaps they have false beliefs that can be addressed. There's many ways to do it, but it really is about being respectful and even compassionate of those who engage in racism. And sometimes that involves forgiveness, sometimes that involves making people responsible, but in ways that are not at all kind of belittling.
Seems like a good place to leave our conversation today. Thank you, Yin, for taking the time to discuss these issues.
My pleasure.